Good evening. I choose tonight to post my first YouTube video for a couple of different reasons. The first being I never really cared to have a webcam. Until recently, I just got a new laptop that happens to have one. And the second reason is that the United States just assassinated one of its own citizens. So let's expound upon this just a moment. The word war has legal connotations, at least in the World Court and the United Nations, and one nation dealing with another. Traditionally, war has meant armed aggression from one nation or state to another. This has been the legal definition of war, at least the recognized definition of war. In other words, you can't legally have a war between neighbors, or you can't have a war on a tactic of war, i.e. terrorism. You can't declare war on a tactic or people in various areas all over the globe engaging in such tactics. And if you want to get downright technical about it, the United States is a terrorist state, and so we'd have to be declaring war on ourselves. You can't have a war against terror, particularly if you're the United States. And we can go on, we can list examples of the terrorist acts the United States has committed. Let's go back to 1973, 9/11, 1973, with the assassination of President Allende of Chile. We can go look in Guatemala. We can look in El Salvador with the assassination of the priests and nuns in El Salvador during the Reagan 80s. In Nicaragua as well, with our illegal support of the Contras against the Sandinista government. So we have committed terrorist acts, and so since we've supported terrorists, if you're going to call Saddam Hussein a terrorist, since we aided and abetted his gassing of the Kurds in northern Iraq with our selling of chemical weapons to him. If you're going to call all those things terrorism, then we're a terrorist state, and so we should be bombing ourselves. All right, let's put that aside. So we've already discussed the idea that you can't have a war against a tactic of war. Let's then discuss this notion of killing somebody, executing somebody without trial. Okay, well, we are a nation of laws, or at least presumably so, at least superficially. And since we are a nation of laws, when somebody in the United States commits a crime, or a citizen of the United States commits a crime, then the crime is investigated, the perpetrator is apprehended, and if he is abroad, he or she, if they are abroad, then the assistance of the other country that they happen to be in is enlisted. The person is extradited back to the United States. Evidence is gathered. A case is brought to trial. The person, in the meantime, is allowed to defend him or herself from the charges, gather evidence in their own defense, and present their case. A jury of the person's peers is selected. The case is heard before a judge and before a jury of the person's peers, the accused peers, and then the jury deliberates and weighs the evidence and finds either guilt or innocence. If it's a guilty verdict, then a punishment is recommended and then ruled upon. If it's an innocent verdict, the person is exonerated and set free. This is what happens in a nation supposedly built on laws. But as we saw with Osama bin Laden, sometimes we don't necessarily care whether or not we're a nation of laws. What we do is we wave the flag, we scream 9/11 till our voices are raspy and sore, we pound our chests, and we wave the stars and stripes, and we have a party and drink lots of beer, and we exclaim and are happy that a human being has been murdered, an unarmed human being has been murdered. Now, it's clear to me that Osama bin Laden, if he was the mastermind of 9/11 and other attacks against the United States, was a despicable individual. But no more despicable than, a mass murderer, a serial killer, or, let's say an American terrorist, born and bred right here in the good old US of A, Timothy McVeigh, or at least another accused terrorist, who happened to have been found guilty by a jury of his peers, and then the sentence was execution, and he was executed. This is how we handle criminals. And when you get right down to it, if one person dies, or 4,000 people die, or 3,500 people die, or 2,200 people die, that's a crime. It's a crime of mass scale, but nevertheless, it's a crime. And that crime deserves no different action in our laws in the United States. No matter how massive the crime is, they're still treated the same way. They're apprehended, a case is brought, etc., etc., etc. What happens to a people that are perverted by this kind of nationalism, where we get so excited and happy that somebody has been killed extrajudicially, which is the technical term for what has happened in both cases here with both bin Laden and Alawaki. The cleric's name, I think that's what his name is, Alawaki. But the technical term was an extrajudicial execution. It means outside of the law, outside of the realm of justice. The term itself should frighten us. Because if it can happen to Alawaki, if it can happen to bin Laden, yes, their skin is brown, and yes, they happen to believe a different religion, and they may even, in fact, have been leaders of Al-Qaeda, and they may have, in fact, they most probably, in fact, were responsible for the death of many, many Americans, and others, for that matter. It doesn't matter. You can't capriciously apply the laws of this country. That's what justice is. That's what laws are. They're applied even-handedly, or at least they're supposed to be. And if they're not, they're meaningless. And if laws in this country are meaningless, then there is no protection from the citizen, or for the citizen. There's no protection for you and I, who are sitting in our living rooms. And let's say Citizen A gets an eviction notice because he has gone behind in his mortgage. So Citizen A scratches off an angry email to his nephew or brother or whomever, saying, let's line them all up and shoot them, or whatever, some angry response. In the wrong hands that email goes, and before he knows it, the Secret Service is at his house, and he's being questioned about a piece of personal correspondence. Worst case scenario, he could be black bagged and taken to some black ops site where, let's say, Egypt or wherever, Saudi Arabia, where he could be tortured and held without charge for indefinitely, outside of contact from his family or no access to an attorney. And if we don't think these things are happening, then we are deceived. Just Google it. Just Google how many reporters, freelance reporters and photographers are taken off airplanes and questioned and having everything in their possession, every electronic device copied or sometimes confiscated altogether. This is happening in this country right now, today. So if you're sitting on your couch, looking at your television screen, cheering Rush Limbaugh and clapping yourself on the back for being a good American because you had a keg party when bin Laden was murdered, then ask yourself, do you feel safer from terrorists today than you did yesterday? And if you do, I'm glad. I'm glad you feel secure. The second thing you have to ask yourself is, how safe do you feel from your government? Because who knows? Tomorrow they may pick up your neighbor. And a month from that, it might be you. I'm just saying. Solidarity. Keep up the fight.